Hello again. I am your instructor, Mark Mitchell, and I just wanted to mention a few things today with you about the chapter that I believe are important there as you read along and study, and hopefully this will help you to focus there on comprehension for your quiz and exam. So let's begin today there, and we are looking at the chapter on culture. And you can see here several things that we want to look at, and I want to share some more information with you on the following slides and make some additional comments as we move along today. I appreciate so much you watching this video. All right, as we start out here, let's look at culture itself. And so the two terms that we focus on here in this chapter are culture and society. And culture is simply, a shared way of life. So you have a group of people there, and they share ideas, values, customs, and we have an example here in picture form. Maybe not transmitting knowledge to us, maybe something of curiosity and probably not quite culture shock, but unfamiliarity there, which that is part of the culture shock that we will see later in today's presentation. Now this culture can be material, so physical, it has a tangible aspect to it, or it can be immaterial, and that a good example there is ideas and values. So many Americans believe in the cultural ideal or value of freedom, and if that is disturbed, then we often have many angry people there. I'm sure there's just a number of cultures there that feel the same way about their personal freedom in day-to-day life. All right, now I mentioned society is our second major term, and that is correct. And a lot of times these are two paired together. That would be appropriate. They mean approximately very similar things, but not identical. So society really has two important distinctions. It is a large number of people, or usually a large number of people there. At any rate, you have people. And then there's a geographical location or territory where these people are defined, where they occur. So think of our globe and our world maps, and on down to ever how small you want to break it down to, and this is a good idea of what society refers to. All right, moving along there, within the idea of this chapter we have cultural universals. And so, this is another throwback to our structural functional paradigm, because when we say something is a universal, that means it is common everywhere, not just one culture, but all cultures. And so this really speaks to the functional importance of this particular item that we see in a culture. So there have been researchers in the past, and let me give you a few examples of what has been recognized as a cultural universal. Jokes, the form of jokes. Now, I'm not saying all of them are good. There are, certainly jokes that are in good taste and bad taste, but the point is that we do find them all around the world. We also find some form of the family all around the world. That's another cultural universal. And there are certainly many, and I'm not going to go through, but just one more example there. But funerals or burials, some type of goodbye to a loved one there, is a third example that I'm going to give you about a cultural universal. Some more terms here, and what their significance for our chapter includes ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. And these are basically somewhat opposites in my view for this reason. An ethnocentrism is simply a culture or a society's perspective on matters or their opinion on matters that really just show us as the center point. That's the second part of the word, is centrism. So many maps, when we draw them, for example, depending on which culture we have them from, we can see one that, from our perspective here in North America, where that is presented on top of South America. Well, if you were to go to South America and get a map there, you would probably not find it difficult to find one where South America is on top. And it would be geographically accurate, it's just that the heading at the top would be south instead of north. The Chinese, for example, think of themselves as the central kingdom. The central kingdom, meaning they are at the center there of their worldview. Nothing wrong with ethnocentrism at all. It's just a perspective there, and it usually does not result in any type of discrimination, prejudice, or persecution. We also see another term there for cultural relativism, and that is when you evaluate a culture from within that culture. Okay, so this is different from ethnocentrism. There we evaluate another culture by our culture. Cultural relativism says, well, what does the culture of origin say about whatever we're doing? Now here you can run into some tricky situations. Think of Nazi Germany in World War II, where not all but many individuals involved in that, the perpetrators of those crimes, would have said, well, this was okay by our standards. In other words, some parts of Germany would have approved of the killing of other individuals. And that's certainly, when you break the law to that extreme, you can't just use the cultural relativism excuse there and get a stamp of approval. So that's probably a drastic example there. But a lot of times, that's some example of where that could, something we would really need to be very skeptical of a claim from that regard. All right, here's an interesting graph there, but it shows us countries with high child marriage rates, a lot of children there at a very young age, and we can see that geographically they seem to come from certain types of countries there, and we could further relate this to ways of life, and predominantly there, lack of education, lack of economic opportunity, environment in which hard physical work is necessary to produce food in order to survive. So having women marry young so that they can have more children is a common thing that if we dig a little deeper, this is what we would find in some of these places, if not most. Low life expectancies here as well, and high birth rates. All right, another idea here for our chapter on culture is sociobiology, but it says, for example, maybe that some of the traits that we see in certain groups of people there are based from genetics. So part of this would discount social learning. This is founded on Darwin's theory of evolution, so depending which way you stand there, you might agree or disagree. Good example would be between the sexes. So we could take men and women, and maybe we could argue from the sociobiology perspective that men are aggressive. Why? Because they are just born that way. It is in their genetic makeup. Because they are men, they are going to be aggressive. For women, we might take sociobiology and make this argument as well. We could say women are emotional. Women are whatever the characteristic, maybe even talkative, because they are women, and that is in the genetic makeup of women, and this is just something that you are born with, depending on whatever group that you're in. Now you can see that I've used sex and gender. Well, what about with cultures? Where could we take it from there? But this is really what this idea is about. So again, we have our choice, but it could lead you into some positions there that you may or may not be comfortable with, but just think of those and work those out, whichever way you feel is the truth. Okay, moving right along here, we see some important processes related to culture and how it spreads around the world. So we see discovery, innovation, discovery, and invention. So sometimes people will take something that's existing that has not really been thought out before, or no one has done it before, such as maybe learning about the structure of DNA. Sometimes people will, with invention, take things that have already been in existence and they will combine them together. So think of the tire, the computer, many inventions just like that that really have a very big impact for many people in the world. I have an article online, and it talks about 100% American. It's an article by Ralph Linton. It's from the late 1930s. But you know, the American way of life is not unique. Now, we can say this about all cultures, really, to some extent. But it talks about these processes that we're looking here looking at right here, right now, and shows that, you know, many cultures, they have adopted practices from other places because they are so very practical and useful for everyday life. There's nothing at all wrong with that. It's actually, you know, very smart to use things like that. To give you one quick example from the article, you know, we use plates and glasses and things like that, and some of our finer plates that we use, you know, might be called china. Well, that's where it comes from, and that's where the name originates. But these are just a few examples. If you read that article, I think you'll enjoy it. It's short, but it brings these things squarely into focus. Now, diffusion is how they spread, and that's really the point there of Linton's article, besides the idea that we think of ourselves as unique, and in reality, we have borrowed a lot of things from other people. Technology is something that we see here in Linsky. You'll notice that name on the slide. He is one person who really talked about culture and technology and how influential it is. We often think of technology from a computer standpoint, and that is true, but it's not always that true. A pencil is technology because it helps to solve a challenge that people have, and that simply is written communication as its first and foremost priority there. The point of technology is it helps to solve challenges, problems, and needs, desires that people have, and that's really the critical aspect of when we talk about technology, not if it's computerized or not. I mentioned earlier there about material and non-material culture, so here's a good chart that breaks down this distinction very well. Material is everything that's tangible. You can touch it. It's available to your senses there. So food, homes, clothes, all this type of stuff, money, things like that. Non-material is often just as important, if not more important. So your beliefs, your philosophy of life, your customs, your traditions, some of these things, or these things when you talk about non-material, do not have a physical form, not a tangible form, but it doesn't mean that they're not important. All right? Sometimes with this culture and the diffusion and with technology, it's spreading, you know, the diffusion is the spreading from one place to another there, from small groups to large groups, and, you know, from one corner of the world to all over in some cases. Cultural lag just says maybe the technology is advancing too fast, too rapidly, and we don't know how to incorporate these changes. Very prime example of that might be with medical technology, in that we can keep the body alive for a great period of time when maybe there's not a quality of life. So here just recently there was a boxer, and he unfortunately was shot, and they were able to keep his body alive, but yet he had no brain activity. So more of a vegetative state, and you know, how many people would want to live in such a state? That's a cultural lag that one must decide for him or herself. Okay, if we move along here, subculture. Now this is a term that's used to identify different parts of society. It's generally a positive term. So if you are a digital native, that is a term there for someone who is really into learning technology through the web, or maybe some type of Apple product. You know, they're a very popular company now that makes a lot of neat and great stuff. Maybe if you like country music, you know, that is the country music lovers. That is a subculture. Or if you're a sports fan, or favorite TV show, or things of this nature, that is simply what a subculture is identifying there. Now we also see some terms there, the mores and folkways and values there, but we'll get into those in just a little bit later and really define those. Now, counterculture is really opposite of a subculture. It is something that is seen in a negative term, a negative light. This would be a connection back to our big three paradigms, but this is the social conflict theory, in my opinion. But it looks at a group of people who says, hey, the existing culture is not what we want. The existing way of life is not our cup of tea. We want to change it. And often this takes radical attempts and measures. So violence would not be out of the question there. Hurting others would not be out of the question, whether physically or mentally. And so that's a very kind of negative term, dangerous term, or could be. Think of the 1960s with Woodstock. Think of countercultures. Excuse me, not countercultures, but the KKK or other hate groups. These are very good examples of what we mean by a counterculture. Culture shock, I mentioned that earlier there, but when you are exposed to a different way of life, an unfamiliarity, this is exactly what's going on. It's not disapproval, but it's just, hey, I don't understand what's going on. Here's a good example. One fella, he was hitchhiking. It was in another country there. I want to say it was in a part of Africa there, if my memory serves me correctly. But he was given a hitchhiking sign, a common, hey, I need a ride is what we recognize this as. Well, a car did stop, but they got out and they beat him up because this thumb indicated something like we would be flipping them the bird or the middle finger, but it was a rude gesture to the passersby, and they responded to it. So you need to be familiar with where you are and the customs. In some cases, like that. So when in Rome, you need to observe the traditions there of the Romans or whatever culture. All right, now we do have some important components or parts to culture, and one of these is language. We cannot have culture without language, and of course there is a written part of language and there is a spoken element there to language. Language is important because it says here's a group of symbols by which we're going to form words and we're going to form thoughts, and so that we can have quick agreement about objects between people there and precisely be stating the same or very similar things. An interesting idea is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, but it's the idea that since languages are structured differently, they structure how we think and perceive of the world. So, if you first learn English because of the structure in that language, that may structure you to think of the world in terms based upon that language. If you learn another language, maybe it's not structured like English. Instead of noun, verb, verb, noun. Or they have many ideas to express snow or ice as compared to not. Things like this would influence how a person thought or could think and shape and think about the world. So that is an interesting idea. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong or limitations, but it's just a particular perspective of what language accomplishes. All right, often important in terms of communication, in addition to what you speak, is nonverbal, so without words. And so, if you have a relationship with somebody, a significant other, you are very well aware of the importance of nonverbal communication. How many of us we could go home and realize that we've done something wrong simply by a gesture of the eyes or a sigh or this, anything like that. And of course, not only at home, but when we're at work and other places, people are communicating to us just as much with nonverbal as they do with verbal. All right, and again, there is a cultural component to it. So what one nonverbal gesture means in one place can mean totally something or nothing at all in another culture. I remember, just to give you an example here about that, the difference in cultures there, but eating breakfast with your left hand in some cultures is seen as a negative thing because that is the hand that is used for hygiene. And so you are dirtying up your food, our equivalent would be it drops on the floor and it's dirty with, barring the 5-second rule or what you observe with that, but it means different things. All right, another important part there to culture is norms, and these are our rules. So we have some that are formal, some that are informal, and if you really want to create chaos, try breaking some of these, but don't say I told you to do that. Phone conversations, for example. When you receive a call, you are to say hello. That is an informal norm. Well, just try to violate that norm. Now, it'll cause a little confusion there, but you'll get the point. If you ever have a call and somebody's trying to sell you something and maybe they say, well, how you doing today? Really give them an answer for that. Go into detail and they'll quickly let you know that, that was not the purpose of my call, even though I did ask you that question. Now, formal norms would be like our speed limit. If you violate that, you'll get a ticket. If you go to the movie theater, you need to wear shorts and shoes, or pants and shoes, or else you're going to be in trouble there. You may have your ticket revoked. More norms there, mores and folkways. Folkways are the minor ones, so maybe my example there that I previously used would also do that, or if you turn a book in late, you may have to pay a small fine. Mores would be ones that are more like the speed limit there, that, if you sell drugs, they're not just going to say, hey, don't do that again, and pat you on the wrist. You're going to have to appear before a judge and fine and possible jail time. All right, so norms are there to help make things familiar, to have congruence there in a cultural setting, but not everybody follows those. We have some people who just will not conform. Most people do, some do not. Now, when you do not, this is where penalties or sanctions come in. So those could be the formal or informal. Usually what we see is they escalate. They're minor corrections, and from there they proceed to more and more intervention about getting people to conform for what is considered standard behavior for your culture. All right. Now, here's some good examples of those sanctions there, of both norms and sanctions there, and also from a formal aspect and a informal aspect as well. So you can see here on the right-hand side, one of the prime ones that goes on is humiliation. Even children do this, and bullying is a very big topic today there that we see. I was aware of a recent case that a girl had cerebral palsy. She had trouble walking. She was 10 years old. She got off the bus, and an adult, he was in his 30s, just got behind her and was mocking her walk. This is bullying and humiliation. He received a month in jail as a sanction, a formal sanction for what he did. So you can see that's a good example of this, these techniques there, and then an escalation of, hey, don't do this again. All right, values, another component there for culture, very important, is what we say, for example, good, desirable, proper, improper, right, or wrong. We're always under evaluation, and if we have our values properly stated, then that process of either correction or approval begins. All right, now here's a good graph, and it's a graph of about 45 years, but it shows us how these values change. People's values always change over time. And so here on our graph, to the left-hand side, you can see the orange line. What was most important here to the students in college who were asked? Well, I want to know what life is all about. I want to have that precisely nailed down in my opinion. Okay, now the least important thing there, also in the 60s, was money. I'm not really concerned about how much money I make or being well off. Well, now look what's important to most college students is, hey, I want to be well off financially. Look what's happened there to a philosophy of life. It's bumped down. But the least important thing there to students now is your environment. So All this shows us is that over time it changes. If we go out another 40 years, there's going to be other changes there. The questions that are reporting on may even be different. All right, another article here in Culture, widespread that our book is pointing out, our text is pointing out, is a culture of cheating. So, think of all the levels there in which cheating is actually permitted, but it's not sanctioned, that we say we're against it, but in reality there really is no punishment. I would throw out a question, have you ever cheated on any quiz or exam in school? Most people probably say yes, if you're being honest. Have you ever cheated on your taxes? Look at the sports world. We're constantly talking about performance-enhancing drugs. On resumes, for example, people will mention things that maybe degrees they haven't earned or something like that, but they're really cheating or lying on those. In the business world, you get ahead sometimes by violating rules. So many people who have broken the rules, there was not very much of a penalty for them. All right, but maybe where cheating is recognized the most and it's come down the most is in the classroom. Well, maybe young people there could point out and say, well, look at the wider culture. This is going on all the time. What's going on in the classroom is nothing unusual than what's been modeled by adults and leaders all the time. All right, that's a very interesting article there to me and something to think about. All right, and finally here, culture war. And so, that is certain topics become very hot in culture there. So bullying right now is one that is very important. And from time to time they will change. Here's some others there that go back a couple decades. Abortion, religious expression, gun control, sexual orientation, and even after events such as 9/11, these are items that really become talked about by media and people, and we can have a wide array of opinions. All right, generally with a culture there, we do have a dominant set of beliefs, and that's simply what our slide here is showing. So maybe there are groups in society that would benefit from this a little bit more and keep the status quo in check. Just another graph here, but this is interesting in terms of torture values. So when you do find those who may be terrorists or others who have committed crimes that impact large groups of people there, how do you extract information there? Well, torture is one way, but here we have a list of countries that say this should be prohibited. So going up from the top down to the bottom. From Great Britain at the top, 82% say it should not be used, all the way down there to India. You notice the United States is about in the middle. All right, here's a good summing up of our different components of culture there that we've talked about. Notice the norms and the values there as well. Our big three perspectives, those come up all the time. They are so very, very important. Make sure you remember the names as well as the basic premises of those positions there. They explain so much, that's why they are continually referred to throughout our book and throughout sociology. All right, and one last component there is bilingualism. So that is, being fluent and able to communicate in 2 or more languages. And so that is a common thing, especially in many countries. In the United States, it's predicted to be even more popular. You've probably noticed elements of this in some of your road signs or in stores that you shop, but they offer instructions about products or details about them in more than one language there. All right, so generally it is for children, it's an indicator of high intelligence there, but it shows that maybe what they receive at home is in school, and they're able to slide from one to the other. If you're an adult, now like me, and you're trying to become bilingual, it is, I think, more difficult as you get older. I'm trying to study a different language here and having lots of difficulty there, learning all the basic functions there. So children are very smart and capable to pick up language. Okay, and this also goes into our social policy that we have mentioned before from previous chapters there to meet the needs of the people. And then our graph here, our slide here from the PowerPoint presentation does show, for example, the extent of bilingualism in and around the nation. And so we can quickly locate North Carolina and find out, approximately not quite 10%, but that is the extent that our graph finds here. Out west, it seems to be more common, as you can see, from Texas to California, where about a quarter or 25% of the population or more are these bilingual homes. All right, I think that's a good thing. Psychology and sociology talk about diversity, and United States is the great melting pot, so there we go there. Okay, this comes to the end here of some of the things I wanted to point out to you as you read and study. I hope you enjoyed the chapter, and thank you for spending your time with me, and I will see you next time.